Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. We're going now to the European Parliament. With us right now is Lukas Mandl, an Austrian politician of the Austrian People's Party, OVP. He's been a member of the European Parliament since November 2017. He sits on many committees, including development, security, defense, but also heads the Abrahamic Caucus of the European Parliament, and he fights against anti-Semitism in Europe. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rabbi Zev Brenner. It's my honor and my pleasure.
And I thank Rabbi Simcha Lyons for making the introduction. So I know you've been fighting against anti-Semitism in the European Parliament, but if you ask the average Jewish American about the EU, the European Union, European Parliament, you know what they'll say? Anti-Israel. Is that true?
Overall, that's wrong. Of course, we have a diverse picture in the European society as well as in European politics, but the vast majority of member states of the European Union and the vast majority of people in the European Parliament want to positively contribute to our ties with Israel. I especially always emphasize that Israel is the only democratic rule of law-based state in the Middle East. Israel is our strong partner in terms of security, of course, also in terms of fighting terrorism, but also in other fields such as economy, academia, research and development, innovation. So even stronger ties with Israel are in the interest of the European Union, and clearly the only Jewish state on earth is a place where we want to have a strong partnership, strong friendship even, and we also see our obligation due to history, at least of parts of Europe, especially my home country, Austria, as well as Germany.
By the way, before we continue, perhaps you can tell our audience the difference between the European Union and European Parliament.
The European Parliament is like the US Congress. The European Council would be like the US Senate, and the European Union is not exactly like the USA, but it's the most proper similarity to explain in a brief way what it is about.
Now, we constantly hear in the United States about Europe being anti-Israel, supporting Hamas, supporting ceasefire, for example, in Gaza. So tell us, from your experience, do you have to work to present pro-Israel resolutions in the European Parliament?
Well, first of all, long before October 7th, 2023, we have been working on the ties with Israel, on fighting anti-Semitism within Europe, on also designating organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, also the Islamic Revolutionary Guards of the Iranian Mullah regime as what they are, terrorist organizations. I always also pointed out that if a terrorist organization would also have something like a political arm, as it is called, it's even more dangerous than a terrorist organization without such a political arm. So this designation was on the table already years before and has remained on the table. It's important to designate terrorist organizations as what they are and to fight them. Secondly, I think we have, especially since October 7, 2023, the strong obligation to do everything for the release of hostages and to do everything to fight anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism. I do follow here the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism is part of anti-Semitism. It has to be fought, no matter whether it is within our countries or conducted with terrorist means and measures like from the side of Hamas. And many resolutions in European Parliament since October 7, 2023 have pointed out this clear stance. We had several times parliamentary debates on the question whether there should be a ceasefire or not. In the beginning, it was a clear defense of Israel against that. We didn't have the debate in the beginning. Afterwards, we had to clearly point out that any kind of ceasefire must be conditional and not unconditional, because terrorism still has to be fought, and Israel is defending itself. And if you compare the number of people that have been killed, that have been taken hostage with other terrorist attacks, no European country at all has faced a terrorist attack such severe. So we should really stand with Israel and support Israel in its fight against this terrorism.
No, I thank you for your leadership in supporting Israel and fighting anti-Semitism. But within the European Parliament, you mentioned at the beginning, it was different regarding the ceasefire. Did things change? And who were those that went and wanted a ceasefire, despite the fact that Hamas was holding hostages and really is a terrorist organization?
It's rather extremist group in the European Parliament and minority, I have to say.
For example, who are they?
Well, there are the left group in the European Parliament. They consist, among others, of communists and others. They are the very extremist left group in the European Parliament, and they time and again practice both-sidism, which are very much criticized, because there is no both-sidism justified if there is a rule of law-based democratic state defending itself and its citizens against really cruel terrorism on the one side, and on the other side, terrorism that by all means even attacks children, women, and men, and uses children, women, and men as shields, as human shields against the defense of this state defending its people. So this both-sidism is the overall ideology umbrella, I would say, of these anti-Zionistic, I would say, extremist groups, and they use it time and again for this or the other measure. The same is true when we have been criticizing UNRWA, for example, for many, many years. Of course, already before October 7, 2023, they were never ready to criticize UNRWA enough. Today we know the problems UNRWA caused or co-caused or even didn't avoid. We know the school books, we know the education material from UNRWA, and it still has to be fought. And the whole region will need a very different structure in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned UNRWA. First of all, they have always been anti-Israel, even fought against Israel in 1967. The Six-Day War has been documented. But here's my question, and I raised this with American politicians. Why is UNRWA in business? From what I understand, the mandate of the United Nations is after every conflict, you don't want refugees. You want to absorb them. The only exception was Arabs in 1948, where they formed this group where they perpetuate the refugees. That's part of the problem in the Middle East. You have these refugee camps, and you perpetuate that state of being a refugee. Why are they existing? They should be put out of business, and all, just like in every conflict, all these citizens, all these people that are out there that are refugees should be absorbed by the host countries where they are, or find another solution. Why are they in existence? They should be put out of business.
Well, it's not my obligation to interpret UN decisions, but I have my.
But European can have an opinion and say, why is this organization opposed funding? President Trump is defunding UNRWA.
Absolutely. There are several things to say about that. First, there is one big UN agency regarding migrants and refugees, and there is one small extra UN agency only for Palestinians, which is UNRWA. This is already an exception. And it might have happened due to this unique situation in the Middle East in the past, but this is not our issue today. Our issue would be, can UNRWA still be funded? And me and colleagues several times in the European Parliament, and Parliament voted against an increase of UNRWA funding. We even win a vote in the committee where I'm leading our parliamentary group, the largest group in the European Parliament, European People's Party's group, last summer in the Development Committee with regard to UNRWA, where others wanted to increase the UNRWA budget again, and we were against, and we could win this vote. So step by step, we do not only criticize UNRWA, we will also defund UNRWA and restructure it. That's the most important thing. To restructure, and as I always say, also to rename UNRWA and maybe give it a different shape, because obviously UNRWA and its structure was not capable of doing anything good, because the money was misused for weaponization, misused for terrorist purposes, misused for education of hatred towards children, and also misuse to spread anti-Semitism. This must stop. This has to stop. And this is why one of the most important first steps for a future of the region will be restructure UNRWA before many other steps that will have to be taken for the region.
So if I understand you correctly, you have been successful in getting to decrease funding for UNRWA. People wanted increase, and you were able to stop that increase in funding for UNRWA.
We were successful in that parliamentary vote. In the European structure, it's not only up to the parliament to decide on that, it's also up to the European Commission, which would be the government, since we compare today the US institutions and the EU institutions today. So the European Commission would be the administration, as you call it in the US. And it's also up to them to follow this decision. But we are working on it, and we have made major steps forward in the last years, I would say.
Our guest is Lukas Mandl. He's an Austrian politician of the Austrian People's Party, OVP. He's a member of the European Parliament since 2017. He sits on many committees, security and defense and Korea relations, digital, AI, but also he heads the Abrahamic Caucus of the European Parliament as well. Now, the decisions of the European Parliament, are they binding on the you mentioned the European group that oversees the European Parliament. So do they take your recommendations, or they don't? Are they legally bound by it, is my question.
They are recommendations. They are not binding in that field, but they have a strong impact, I would say. The European Parliament has a strong leverage, especially when it comes to the EU budget, which is called multi-annual financial framework. That's the technical expression for it. And there will be a new multi-annual financial framework for 7 years to be discussed and negotiated this very year, 2025. The whole year will be about this long-term budget of European Union, and we will set the right focus there. Also, and especially when it comes to fight terrorism, for security, and also with regard to our ties with Israel.
Well, I hope that UNRWA gets defunded as much as possible to zero, as far as I'm concerned. But if you're able to restructure it and reshape it and becomes a different entity, that's also works, because I believe not only are they, as you correctly pointed out, the textbooks are poisoning the minds, not just against Israel, against the West, against America, against all the other Western countries, but at the same time, they've actually aided and abetted terrorism, now helping Hamas, where Hamas uses UNRWA vehicles and UNRWA schools. But in 1967, their people actually fought against Israel. Happened again recently, too, by the way. Their people fought with Hamas. So whatever we can do to change that would be wonderful and very important for world security.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And this is why defunding is only one step. Restructuring, reshaping, renaming, and maybe also give, I would say, the international entities supporting the region a different umbrella, a larger umbrella maybe than UN. This will be the task of all positive, sane and sober, like-minded powers on earth for the years ahead.
Want to focus on anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is growing worldwide, including in Europe. I know that you're fighting anti-Semitism. What is being done to stop, or at least to minimize? You can never eradicate anti-Semitism. What's being done to minimize it in Europe?
A lot of education has to be done, not only in schools and in formal ways, but also in society. In daily media, in daily communication, online, especially online anti-Semitism has increased in Europe due to data we collect every year and make studies about, but also in the towns and streets of Europe, especially after October 7, 2023, which is absurd and paradox. Anti-Semitism has increased. So it was Israel that has been attacked by a terrorist means of the most terrible kinds. And it's the other way around. What's increasing within Europe, it's anti-Semitism and not that much of partnership and alliance with Israel. And this is something we have to fight. We have to absolutely not accept in any way. And this is why we make studies. We document each and every case of anti-Semitism, especially in my home country, Austria, also in Germany and other parts of Europe. And we blame each and every anti-Semitic attack. And there is no small anti-Semitic incident. There are not small and large ones. each anti-Semitic incident is a trouble and has to be followed up, has to be sanctioned, has to be blamed, has to be brought to the public, has to be made transparent. And this is what the European Parliament works about and works on, especially this very week. There will be founded for the new mandate of the European Parliament a new working group against anti-Semitism headed by a Swedish colleague. And this is something I can emphasize. But as we all know, this is a work that must never stop. It's every day newly something to be done and to be undertaken.
I just want to get personal, if you don't mind. You grew up in Austria. Tell us about your background. You're, I know, a strong supporter of Israel. You're fighting anti-Semitism. What is in your background that made you such a champion for the Jewish people and for Israel?
I don't think I'm a champion. I just try to do what is right, and especially in the political field, I want to do what's senseful. Sometimes in political life, you're not sure whether it makes sense, but fighting anti-Semitism, strengthening ties with Israel clearly makes sense, and this is why I want to do it. My background is being born in Vienna, raised in Gerasdorf, close to Vienna, which is my hometown, and I once was a vice mayor there, elected vice mayor, and in my childhood I've heard about a forced labor camp, but it was only rumors about the forced labor camp which would have been existed towards the end of the Second World War in 1944 in my hometown. But there was no research, no documentation about it. It was not even clear. And as a vice mayor, I made a project happen with academics of the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, of the archive to document the Nazi terrors in Austria, which is an official institution in Austria, and other academic institutions in order to research on this forced labor camp. And it came out there, of course, was this forced labor camp with Jewish Hungarians, children, women, and men in 1944, with around 300 detained people there. Some even were murdered there, they died. Others were brought to concentration camps from there. Nearly all of them passed away, were murdered by the Nazi regime. And we even had, when we presented to the public the whole project and also the memorial site, which is now present close to the railway station in Gerasdorf, we had visiting Hungarian novelist, author, and journalist. István Gábor Benedek was his name, who was a survivor of this forced labor camp. He was 6 years old, a 6-year-old boy in 1944, and survived. And he visited this event. I visited him several times afterwards in Hungary. He later became a honorary citizen of Gerasdorf 2 years later. Unfortunately, in the meantime, he passed away. But he's an example for a person, a human being, which was affected as a child by these terrors. And actually, we named in Gerasdorf a street after his mother. Ruja Braun was her name. And these are the ways to commemorate the Holocaust, the Shoah, locally, not only in history books and in, I don't know, TV documentaries, but locally where it really happened, in order to also make people aware of this very direct circumstances and nature of these terrors. And secondly, it's not only about commemoration. As a Jewish leader in New York many years ago once told me, it's not about mourning only the dead ones, but it's also to make Jewish life happen, to foster Jewish life. And this is also what I want to add regarding the fight against anti-Semitism. It can also not stop with fighting anti-Semitism and trying to erase anti-Semitism and blaming each incident. It must mean to foster Jewish life, to make Jewish life happen and possible within Europe, since Jewish life is a core part of Europe's identity. It's not something extra or additional. It's a core part of Europe's identity, historically, in present times, and also for the future.
Now, growing up in Vienna, in Austria, did you learn about the Holocaust? Was it taught? Did you learn about Jews and Judaism? What did you learn growing up?
Yeah, frankly, it was in school. So I'm born in 1979. In my childhood and when I was a teenager, it was a clear part of the curriculum in schools to learn about the Second World War, the Shoah, the Holocaust. and also to visit memorial sites where in the past concentration camps had been. But it was not that clear that time to also learn about present times and about Jewish life in our society in present times. And this is something that has changed and continuously have to change. And also the encounter between Jewish and non-Jewish citizens is very important. The Jewish community in my home country, in Austria, especially in Vienna, the so-called israelitische Kultusgemeinde is doing a lot of positive projects together with schools, with also non-Jewish school students, to make this encounter happen as much, as intense and as often as possible.
How large? I know in Germany too, anti-Semitism has been growing in Austria and Germany, etc. So it seems that the problem is getting worse, despite the education, despite, you know, the Shoah classes that one may take in school. There's a core element of very anti-Semitic groups and people in both countries and Europe.
I would say you're right, of course. Anti-Semitism is increasing. We see it in data, we see it in daily life. I would say there are three main pillars we have to address. One pillar is the old, awful European, one could also say, of course, Central European anti-Semitism, which has been there in history and is still not completely gone. That's the first pillar. The second pillar would be especially the political anti-Zionism, which is, as I referred before to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, which is also part of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. So using double standards against Israel, using both sidism when Israel fights against terrorists, or even to doubt the very existence and the right to exist for the state of Israel. And the third pillar is, of course, based in political Islam. I always emphasize not in Islam as a religion, but in political Islam, in Islamism, in this ideology of hatred based there, which is also present in Europe due to migration, in the first place, illegal migration, especially the last years. And these three pillars have to be addressed, and we have to see each and every dimension of anti-Semitism in order to proper fight it. And I have to say that again, also to foster Jewish life.
Our guest is Lukas Mandl. He is a Austrian politician of the Austrian People's Party, OVP. He's been a member of the European Parliament since November 2017. He sits on many committees, including Korea and digital, AI, foreign interference in the democratic process. But also he's the chair. He heads the Abrahamic Caucus of the European Parliament. So I'm curious to know, what does the European Parliament feel about the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States? What's the relationship? What is the feeling in the Parliament?
I can't speak on behalf of the whole European Parliament. What I can say is, first, I made an event, even on inauguration day in the European Parliament, named America First, ? Europe Fast, ! So we have to be fast in strengthening our relation with the United States, in strengthening this partnership, because in my view, there is absolutely not any doubt about the necessity of this partnership. We need it. Both sides need it, by the way, US and EU. The question is how we will conduct this partnership during the times of the Trump administration. And here we are. It's daily politics now. It's not a question anymore about the election, because we respect the democratic election result in the US. That's what I also shared several times in the domestic media here. We respect the election result. We would respect each and every other election result democratically as well. Now we have daily politics, and they are about tariffs, they are about development aid, they are about security relationship, and we work on that on a daily basis.
Talk to me about Ireland. Ireland is maybe the most anti-Israel EU member.
Of course, I'm concerned about the matter of fact that not only Ireland, but also Spain, 2 EU member states, have even recognized a Palestinian state around a year after the attack of October 7, 2023. If I imagine what pattern that delivers, not only to the region, but to the world, that if you, sorry to say that directly, you kill in a cruel way more than 1,000 Jews, you take others hostage, and a year later you would be recognized with your own state, this is absurd, this is wrong, this is not the behavior that will help in any way to fight violence, especially terrorist violence of any kind. And this is why I'm really concerned about these matters of fact. But I regard to matters of fact. I do not want to judge a whole country for this or that. It's mainly the governments. I mean, I have Spanish colleagues here in the European Parliament who work at least as hard on positive EU-Israel relations as I do. And they're also from Spain. So it's never a country in its entirety that has to be blamed. It's a government, in that case, the Spanish government and the Irish government were definitely, I would say, on the wrong side of history.
You mentioned Spain, but there are 13 states in the EU: Belgium, Cyprus, Estonia, Finland, France, Greece, Ireland, Latvia, Luxembourg, Malta, Portugal, Slovenia, and Spain that were in favor of a resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly in September that demanded Israel end its unlawful presence in the occupied territories of Palestine within 12 months. So you see,
Look,
there's an anti-Israel bias of some of the member states. While you've been supportive of Israel, is that starting to fray?
Look, it's all about the governments. Actually, I'm happy to say today that the government in my home country, Austria, more than 5 years ago, imagine, long before the terrorist attack of October 7, 2023, and these UN decisions, has literally put in the government's program that the government of Austria will never support anti-Israeli decisions in international organizations such as in the UN. So this would not happen from the side of the Austrian government, and I can only encourage other governments to also positively contribute to a good EU-Israel relation, to support Israel in its fight against terrorism, and to say something positively in the end of today's program, because people here in the studio strongly recommend for me to leave the studio because it's booked by others for afterwards. Actually, the Abraham Accords are the only positive geopolitical development of this century yet. And this is to be supported in the interest also of EU, in the interest of the whole free world, in the interest of peace and the proper future for the Middle East in its entirety.
Lukas Mandl, I thank you for your leadership, for your standing strong and being supportive of Israel, despite there is opposition in the EU. And you've been since 2017 part of the European Parliament. Thank you for being part of it. We look forward to having you back. Keep that dialogue going. And we appreciate what you're doing. What you're doing is not just for Israel. It's really for democracy. It's really for humanity in stopping the terrorists and the Islamic fundamentalists, especially as we see the terror, what they did in Gaza, and what Iran wants to do. We didn't talk about Iran, and certainly encouraging the Abrahamic Accords, I think, is important. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi Zev Brenner, for having me. It's my honor, my pleasure. Best regards from the European Parliament's premises in Strasbourg, France.
Thank you. Look forward. We'll have you back very soon, God willing.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Anyway, thank you. Wonderful interview. We appreciate it. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you.